1, 0. All right, welcome everybody. Happy Thursday, and I hope you guys are all having a great day so far, and want to welcome you to yet another amazing virtual event with Power to Fly. So today we are going to be in conversation with Amy Luo from Lattice. Apologies if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but give me a heads up if that's okay. Sweet, thank you. I'm really excited to get going and introduce you to Amy and get the chat started. But before we do that, I just want to highlight for anybody who might be new, or if you haven't been to one of these in a while with us, I just want to say hi, welcome. What the screen that you're seeing in front of you is a couple quick housekeeping items. I'm going to go over these real quick, and then we'll try and get into our questions as soon as possible. But I just want to highlight real quick that today's event, like all of our virtual events, is all about you. It's about our attendees, it's about our community, and we want to make sure that the time you spend with Power to Fly is well worth it. So if you are here on the call today and you are joining us for this live recording, we want to make sure that you understand all the ways you can participate, because we highly encourage you to do so. So if you'd like to ask questions of our speaker or add comments, please feel free to do so. You can come off mute to do that if you'd like. If you do come off mute though, I will tell you, you will show up on the live recording of today's session. So if you have your camera on, that's what will show. If you just have your display name or an avatar, that's what will show up. So if you have any kind of privacy concerns for whatever reason and just don't want to participate via audio, that's totally okay. You can still participate via chat. You can either write into the main Zoom chat your questions or comments, or you can DM them directly to me. Don't send them to the Power to Fly chat and learn, because that's a bot. It's just there to record our meeting today. So send them to me, Meg, she, her, _Power to Fly. So that way I can raise your questions to our guests and keep you anonymous. Or, it doesn't matter the reason, I'm happy to do that. Like I said, today's session is being recorded. So if assuming that something happens, like always happens on one of these chats, where Amy says something absolutely amazing and you want to share it with somebody, there's a couple ways to do that. So in about 1 to 2 business days, everyone that registered for this session is going to get an email with a link to where they can rewatch the video on our website. Now, if you if you can't wait the 1 to 2 days and you just have to send this recording to a coworker or a relative or your friend, you don't have to wait. You can always head over to our YouTube channel. I'll drop the link for that here in the thread in a little bit. But it is the live stream of this event will be posted to our YouTube channel, usually within about 5 to 15 minutes at the end of the session. Like I said, you can keep up with us on our social media. So we've got 2 Power to Fly YouTube channels, one for our summit stuff and main and blogs, and then another that's just dedicated to our chat and learns, like today's event. But you can also keep up with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, in addition to YouTube. We are at Power to Fly on all of those. So feel free to take pictures or video as we go. You can share with your social network and let people know that you are learning with Power to Fly today. If you, I want to stress to everybody that if you don't want to come on camera, that's totally fine. I always enjoy seeing people's, smiling, maskless faces safely. But just so you know, you don't have to be insta perfect. I think I'm on day 4 of dry shampoo. So, messy buns, non-traditional workspaces, furry coworkers, child coworkers, all of this stuff is welcomed, encouraged. We want to help you and meet you where you are so that you can learn and grow with us. So as we get going here, I'm going to talk a little bit about, Lattice as well as our speaker before we jump into the questions. So obviously Lattice is part of the talk today. Oops, sorry, I just realized I have those out of order. So my bad, guys. So we're going to talk a little bit about Lattice. I'm going to share a link with you to where you can check out their company page. That's what you're seeing right now. This company page is a way where you can, get more information about the company, especially if, some of the things that Amy says today really kind of pique your interest, make you want to learn more about Lattice and about their org. You can definitely check that out. There's also a link to where you can take a look at recordings from past events that they've partnered on with us, as well as where you can see upcoming events that they're going to join us for in the future. So things like our virtual job fairs or our mini summits. You can also check out their open roles. Currently on Lattice's company page, let's see, We've got over 50 jobs posted with us. So when you go to click on those open jobs, that'll take you down to the bottom of the screen. You can see what's there. You can sort through by keyword, all that kind of good stuff. One thing I do want to highlight is that at the top of this screen, in the upper right-hand corner, when you get to this page, is going to be a big pink follow button. If you are interested in working with Lattice, whether or not you're actively job seeking, I very much recommend that you click that follow button. It's going to do two basic things for you. It does a lot of other things, but basically what it's going to do is it's going to let Lattice know that you are interested in them even before you fill out an application. And it's also going to keep Lattice on your radar by letting you know when they post new roles. So whether you are actively looking and want to make sure that you stay up to date on Lattice's open positions, or if you're not actively looking, but like Lattice kind of piques your interest a little bit and you want to make sure that the next time you do go looking around to see what else might be out there, you don't forget about Lattice. It is a really great way to make sure that they stay on your radar without, you kind of feeling like you have to, kind of do all the legwork for this. So, like I said, I shared the link for that in the chat thread. I'll keep sharing that going forward. But as we jump into the meat and potatoes of today's event, I'm really excited to introduce you to Amy Luo. Amy is a senior product designer at Lattice, which is a people management platform that helps teams build relationships and do their best work. Amy currently leads design on the reviews team, where she collaborates with product managers and engineers to make performance reviews at companies easier for HR administrators, managers, and employees. With a background in art and a degree in visual communications, Amy began her career in marketing and visual design before expanding into product design across web and mobile at companies like Twitter, Patreon, StumbleUpon, and more. So welcome, Amy. We're so happy to have you join us today. Is there anything you'd like to add to that bio or anything else you want our guests to know?
Thank you so much. Amazing intro. I don't know if I have anything to add, but thank you.
So before we jump in, last but not least, before we jump into the questions, the slide that you're seeing right now is going to cover some of the principal themes that we're going to talk about during today's conversation. Now, we identified these both through conversations with Amy prior to this event, as well as based on the questions that y'all submitted when you registered for this event. So what I want y'all to understand is that we crafted all these questions based on, crafted these topics based on submitted questions, and we, took all your questions and arranged them into this conversational format that will help us cover these. But like I said, if you are here and you made it a priority of your day to be here with us, we want to make sure that you get your questions asked and answered. So if you have a question that you submitted, but you're not sure we'll be able to get to it, or that you just want to make sure it gets answered, please feel free to ask. If there's a question that occurs to you during today's session, if something Amy says, if you'd like, to expand on that topic or dig in deeper, or you're confused about an answer, please feel free to let us know. You can do that, via audio. You can put it in the Zoom chat, or you can DM me. Doesn't matter. But we just want to make sure that you understand that you have the power to really drive today's conversation. So over today's chat, we're going to talk about and kind of gain a clear understanding of the product design process. We're going to talk a little bit about what you need to know before you enter into product design as a field, as well as some tips to prepare you for your first job in design. So as we jump in here, I want to get started with a question that we got asked actually a lot. So a lot of people are thinking about doing this in terms of a work transition, not necessarily just like coming straight out of school. So this person wanted to know, what do you wish you had known when you were transitioning to product design? I thought this was a great question for you, since obviously you did transition after starting your career.
I think I wish I would have known how much time is spent leading up to designing rather than the actual designing part itself. I end up spending a lot of my time collaborating with other people and gathering inputs to inform what the design should be rather than designing the actual thing itself. So this means talking to people to understand what their needs are, coordinating things between teammates, getting feedback from users and internal stakeholders, and not just sitting at a computer and like pushing pixels around in like design software like I expected.
I think that's a good point to make, because I feel like, I have obviously no experience in product design, but having worked at a very tech forward and tech focused company for the last 2 years, it is definitely, it's definitely something that kind of, you're right, like the collaboration and the background work that goes into it is a lot bigger and involves a lot more people than I think I ever would have realized without that experience.
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
I love that. Okay, so in terms of the transition you made, especially when you were, kind of looking at things like your resume, a lot of people wanted to know what was the number one thing that stands out most in a job application for a UX or product designer role. Now, obviously, you're not a part of hiring, but you had to make your own resume. So, what would you say to this person?
I think for designers, the most important piece of your job application is actually the portfolio. So usually when you apply to a design job, they'll ask you to submit a link to a portfolio. And that's usually like a website that you put together with some work examples. So that's really the most important piece, since you're generally judged on the quality of your work. So it's kind of the first impression that you make, and it'll also be likely the deciding factor in whether or not you get to move ahead to interviews. And then once you get to interviews, you usually have to also present your portfolio once you're in the room with people or in a virtual room with people. So you should make sure that it really only showcases your best work. And you'll have to demonstrate not only kind of the quality of your design craft, but also your thought process in working through a project from the beginning to the very end. So that means explaining the initial problem, showing sketches, early ideas, where these decision points were, any trade-offs that you made, in addition to the final design solution and what came out of that. So a lot of people skip over the thought process portion, but I really think that's what's really important in getting you hired.
Okay, so you talked about addressing that in terms of an interview. Is it something that should also be like at least touched on within your portfolio itself? So that way, if like if you're sharing this link ahead of a job interview, that way, you are kind of addressing some of these questions that maybe they would have, or is it something where, you treat your portfolio kind of like the trailer and you want them to come at like bring you in for an interview so you can talk through it?
Yeah, I've seen it done both ways. I would say if you're starting out in your career, it's important to show that immediately on your web portfolio, because a lot of times hiring managers are just taking a couple minutes to browse through someone's portfolio. And if they don't see that immediately, sometimes it's like a red flag. So the quality of your work would have to be really, really high, or you would have to have a lot of experience to overcome that. So I think if you have the time to put together what you want to be a really strong portfolio, you should put together, like, commonly we have these case studies where you'll have visuals and then also a lot of written explanation over like what goes into each visual that you're showing.
Okay. So one thing that I'm kind of a little curious about here is, you're talking about like you have to develop this portfolio and you come from a marketing background. Was this something that you kind of had in place or was part of your like your resume or like the information about your job that you sort of like, kind of kept on hand? Or is a portfolio really specific to, to product design in that you hadn't really had to do anything like this before? Because I'm wondering about people that are transitioning, like if you're transitioning from a position or an industry that doesn't use portfolios, how can you build that up if you don't have, if you don't have any projects or any reason to show that, I guess.
Yeah. I came from a design background, even though it wasn't exactly product design. So it was expected to have a portfolio for even the roles I was starting out in. So I at least had that expectation. I would think if you're transitioning from a role that's not design related, you may not be prepared for that. And I want to say that it's very important to have that, because it's one of the first things that an employer really looks at when they're assessing resumes. So it's a combination of your resume as well as your portfolio. And I know if you may not have like a design job with experience to put in your portfolio, there are a lot of other things you can do, like personal projects, side projects, freelance projects. I think projects where you're working for someone else or building the needs of someone else rather than just yourself are probably better to showcase, just because it helps you think more in terms of different trade-offs, because maybe my client wants this thing and I may not necessarily agree. And talking through that is very important experience for you to have on the job, but also it will give you more to write about in explaining your thought process in your portfolio as well.
Okay. So we have a question from the chat along this line. So Munir is asking, do you recommend any case structure? Do you recommend any case structure in particular when you make a case study in your portfolio? And then there's a follow-up question. What's the difference between a case study in the portfolio, like on your website, versus what you're presenting in interviews? So are you just like kind of reading off what's already there, or should you be like making connections that are not just, you know, already present in your portfolio? So let's talk about the first one first, about the idea of like what kind of structure should you be using to put this case study idea in your portfolio?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I talk about the portfolio, a lot of people think about like a website portfolio, and then they're not sure if that's also the same thing that you present when you come on site for the interview. In my experience, it's much better to have that website portfolio kind of be a peek into your abilities, and then for the one you present in the interview to be more of a deep dive. So I'll touch on that more later, but for like the website like portfolio version, what I typically like to do is to have the final solution kind of be at the top, kind of like the trailer idea that you talked about, because it'll immediately grab someone's attention if it looks interesting, or if it looks like really high quality, or they just want to dig in more. You want that teaser to really bring people in. And then once they come in and like click in on that project, for example, like that's when you can really showcase your thought process. And I would structure that kind of in a timeline format. So what was the initial problem that you were encountering, why it was important, and then take it from like early concepts and work through the middle part where maybe you tried a bunch of different solutions, and then go through like, oh, I chose this one because yada, yada, yada. And then this was the final outcome. And then when users got this product, they were super happy, or something like that. Like, it's important to wrap it up with outcomes at the end. So kind of like a more timeline format.
Okay. And just personal curiosity, if you have, you know, if you have these things and these projects you can put in your portfolio, and there might not be as like, they'll be linear, but they're not quite as direct or simple a process. Like, let's say there were like 18 rounds of revisions, and you made, you know, you got all the way to step 17 with this one, and then we had to go all the way back to the drawing board. How brief do you want to try and be with these things? Is it something where you, if they want more detail, they should ask? Or is it something where, you know, you kind of have to find that line between oversharing and undersharing so they get like the full idea of what you did on the project?
Yeah, I think it's great to show that, just because as designers, we all know projects don't go according to plan, and there are those projects with 17 revisions. So that's real, you know? And in your website, like maybe you want to touch on that a little bit, but more on a high level. And then that's something that you can share in the deep dive version of your presentation in like a Google Slides presentation format when you're brought on site for the interview, because they really want to hear about challenges that you encountered, what you learned from that. And it, even if you're showing the same project, it kind of, you're able to portray it from a more comprehensive lens.
Awesome, I love that. And great question from Munir. Thank you so much. And I apologize if I'm butchering your name as well. Doing my best here, guys. Okay, so let's address kind of the idea about, you know, kind of still on the resume topic. This person wanted to know, how can my resume get noticed by recruiters if I have mostly unrelated work experience? They're unsure how to really be answering questions in an interview setting about transferable skills. So let's address the first about like getting your resume noticed if you don't necessarily have, you know, a concrete list of like, here's my previous work experience in the area.
Yeah, kind of in the same vein, I think employers are primarily evaluating the work itself. So if your resume ends up being not as relevant, I would lean even more heavily on showing good work in your portfolio, because it's very common in design not to have a design background and transition in from other roles or be self-taught. I know plenty of self-taught designers that are incredibly talented. So at least your portfolio is within your own control, and you can showcase any side projects or freelance work, even if you haven't held a design role before.
Okay, great. All right, so if we're talking about those transferable skills, then are there specific ways to really like kind of address that within an interview, or is it kind of going to really depend on what your prior experience entails?
Yeah, I think it does depend on what your prior experience is and what skills you have that you think are transferable. But with design, there are a lot of soft skills that are very important rather than the hard design skills. So communication, being able to prioritize well, teamwork. So if you're really strong in those areas, you can use that to emphasize how that would make you a better designer.
Okay. We have a question coming in from the chat here. Celeste wants to know, what kind of things should you include in your portfolio? Now, I know this is kind of a broad question, so Celeste, if you have specifics on this, please feel free to come off mute or chime in the chat, either way. But Amy, are there any like kind of core things that like should be in a basic project? Like you should have a project like this or something on this scale, or I'm totally spitballing because like I said, I don't have a ton of familiarity here. But are there kind of basics for putting together a portfolio?
If you have an idea of what kind of job you're applying for, it's nice to cater your portfolio to those kinds of jobs. Like if you're really interested in mobile, for example, I would show mobile projects because you'll probably be applying to mobile positions. If you're interested in like social media, for example, like maybe you want to include more consumer focused work. So I would say cater the projects to what you're interested in because that's what you're being evaluated on. So if you want to design for mobile, but all you show are like desktop projects, it doesn't show that you have the capabilities to fill that role, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a ton of sense. We also have a question from Patil asking, if you are new to the field, should you include college projects on your resume? What's your thoughts on this?
I think that works. I think it's better to have something where you are kind of working for another client beyond yourself. So it kind of depends on what those college projects are. If it's like design something for a fake client, and depending on like what constraints you're encountering during that process, that could be something good to show. It's definitely better than not having anything or having something very unrelated. But there are things that come with college projects that sometimes aren't super realistic. So I would just be aware of that because like maybe they don't have like real life constraints about budget or timeline, or the client for some reason just like doesn't like any of the directions that you presented, or they really liked the one that you thought wasn't a good direction. So those kind of things are great to showcase in your portfolio. And if they come up in the college projects, that's perfect. If not, then you might have to supplement with some other projects.
I thank you for detailing that out, because as you said it, I was like, oh, well, like real world constraints. And the first thing I thought of was budget, but then couldn't really think of anything beyond that. So thank you for kind of touching on that. All right, so we also had a lot of questions from people curious about your transition. So a lot of them wanted to know how long this transition took you, kind of from start to finish. So obviously there's a large amount of interpretation and leeway there about like, well, start to finish meaning what? But let's say, kind of from when you first started figuring out you wanted to transition into product design to the point that you were able to start getting interviews or even just your first job in the field. How long did that take you?
I don't fully remember when I realized like I really wanted to pursue this more. And I also didn't really have a hard transition into product design. So I was already working in a design related field, and I was working in kind of like a tangential product design role as a visual designer or a UI designer, which at the time kind of meant very similar things. So It's difficult to say, but like when I started as a marketing designer up until when I got my first role as a full-fledged UX slash product designer, it was probably around 4 or 5 years. But again, I worked as like a UX visual designer in between that time.
There it is. Sorry, I lost my mute button there for a second. No, I think that's a really good point. You know, like it greatly depends on where you're transitioning from. Before we jump forward and dig in a little bit deeper, we do have a couple questions more about portfolios. So Celeste had asked about best places to get examples of portfolios or best practices to that, you know, as you're approaching this task. Another person had asked if you need to have should you also put your resume in your portfolio website? Should it be the same when you apply for different jobs, or do you, kind of tweak it from job to job? So let's address the first about like where you can kind of get examples of portfolios or, guidelines for yourself if you're new to this.
There are some portfolio websites that host portfolios that might be helpful to look at. I can think of Behance off the top of my head is one where a lot of designers host their portfolios. I don't remember where my portfolio is hosted, but they also showcase examples of other people's portfolios. But I think what actually might be helpful is looking up specific people, like maybe designers that you look up to, or designers that you know in the industry or find online, and seeing what their website looks like. It's typically their portfolio. So you can kind of like think about a specific individual that maybe has the career that you want, or someone that you really admire, and see what they tend to do in their actual portfolio.
Okay. I'm also sharing some links with y'all in the chat thread right here. I'm going to put them out here in just a second. There we go. These are some links to where you can search our chat archives, like in our video archives for like, past events that we've held on these subjects. So especially if you're interested in things about like your resume, your portfolios, job hunting, we have a lot of chats that focus on these items in particular. And once you are into the data bank of our previous events, then you can search by keyword. So you can, kind of tweak and mess around with the search with different phrasing or different tenses or whatever to try and see what's going to get you the most relevant information for you. So definitely check those out. Anything with either Jill De Silva or Kelly Kugler are really great. Not just because I've sat in on those chats, because I've watched a lot that they've done and they're really amazing and really helpful. Okay, so let's go to one more question from our pre-sub list, and then we'll touch on what Miranda's asking here. A lot of people wanted to know, how to transition from one specific field into product design. Now, there were a lot of different questions or different, specifics that they wanted to give. But do you think that it's easier to transition from certain jobs or certain industries in particular?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, related fields, I would imagine, are always easier because there are a lot of overlapping skill sets. I've seen a lot of teammates throughout my career transition from things like front-end web development and engineering. Graphic or brand design is super common, like me. UX research, architecture is also very common. Those are the ones that I tend to see the most, and just because they're all sort of related, but definitely not the only paths to get here.
Okay. So we also have a question. So like I said, we have a question in the chat thread here, and I think this is probably very interesting. And I thank you, Miranda, for asking. We probably should have asked this sooner. Miranda's asking, what differentiates product design from other design roles like UX designer, visual designer, marketing designer, etc.?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, all the job titles are just intermixed and used very differently or interchangeably, and it varies from company to company. I would say product design usually encompasses a broad variety of these things, whereas things like UX designer, visual designer, marketing designer are a little more specific in their skill set. So product design, I think, is the most broad terminology because it could mean anything and usually means everything. UX design is very heavy on like wireframing, information architecture, maybe some research, but research can also be broken out as its own thing. Visual design and UI design are often used interchangeably, and they're more on the like latter half, I guess, of the design process where you're really executing on the visuals and the actual pixels and like what color is this thing, what size is this thing, that kind of stuff. And marketing design typically works in another function and has like more of a marketing driven approach. Like here is a landing page, here is an ad, here is like an email design, that kind of stuff. Whereas product design, UX design is more around maybe an app or a website or something that has more extended functionality and more, I guess, intricate behaviors and interactions. And visual design can kind of mean both. So it's kind of a mess. And honestly, when I started in my career, like they were called like UX designers or UI designers or UX UI designers. And then product design kind of became the trendy job title that everyone glommed onto. So it changes over time too.
Thank you for addressing that, because you're right. A lot of these terms seem like they might be set in stone, or you know, kind of look from job posting to job posting and realize like they might be very specific to the company. I know like Microsoft is one of those that has like really like distinct job titles that are very similar to others in the same field. They might even mean the same job, but that's the term they use at that company. So I think, yeah, it's helpful to know that like that there is a little bit of wiggle room in here. And it never hurts to ask, obviously, about like, you know, what focus the design role really would take. The idea about the marketing designer is genius too, because I never would have thought about that as like a separate thing, just because, you know, everybody wants to drive traffic to your app or to your page or whatever. But yeah, I think that's a really good point to make. Okay, so we touched a little bit on this earlier, but we talked a little bit earlier about like some of the soft skills that really are very helpful for transitioning into product design. If you don't have that much experience, obviously, in product design or in the field, what soft skills do you think really translate best? We talked a little bit about, you know, things like communication or time management, but are there any more that we should really think of, or maybe like something that we probably wouldn't think of as a transferable skill that is actually pretty important?
Yeah, I still think communication is one of the biggest ones. You just end up having to use it a lot to articulate your design reasoning and why you did what you did, how it ties back to the problem. We spend a lot of time talking about our designs to get stakeholder buy-in and facilitate discussions within your team. And also to translate the design for engineers, because oftentimes you're not the one building the design. So someone really has to understand the picture of the design in order to understand how it works, and you'll have to communicate that. One big thing I think is kind of experimentation is a big part of product design, seeing what works, being able to be flexible. So if you have like an open mindset, a growth mindset, an appetite for learning and curiosity, that's really important. Maybe having self-awareness about strengths and weaknesses, not only your own strengths and weaknesses as a designer, but also being able to evaluate a design on its strengths and weaknesses. Very hard to say. So I think your design work will be a lot better for it if you can objectively evaluate that way and have a lot of self-awareness and not be too tied to your first idea or the idea that you personally really like, and be open to other viewpoints.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, it's one of those things like you see a lot of these like reality competitions, right? Like Top Chef or Project Runway or something like that. And I know I'm like seriously dated in those. Sorry, we haven't had cable for several years. But like, I think it's really interesting that you highlight the idea of collaboration and being able to like really kind of objectively step away from your own opinions to either listen to what the client is saying or to what your team is saying. Because, you know, these types of things, they're very creative and very specialized roles, but you don't exist in a vacuum unless you are like hanging out your shingle. It's just like, I'm a sole contributor. You can hire me for freelance stuff, blah, blah. You're still going to have to collaborate with a client. So
Yeah.
these things don't happen in a vacuum. So you are going to have to work with other people. From a kind of not morbid curiosity, but just like, as I'm a little bit curious here, is there ever been like a skill that you saw, soft or hard, that somebody mentioned like on a resume that was like kind of out of left field, but like actually made a ton of sense? Like, oh, that's so bonkers. How are you going to like, defend that as a great soft skill to have, or, apply reason? But it actually was like, oh yeah, you're right. That's really cool. Have you ever seen like something really off the wall come across?
I mean, not really off the wall. I think design encompasses so many things that it's kind of easy to spin a lot of soft skills into being applicable just because you're juggling so many different things. Really, what's important is having curiosity and empathy and the ability to like remove yourself from the equation, if that makes sense, and check your own assumptions. So I think it's not common for job seekers to you want to convey a sense of confidence and that you know what you're doing, but actually a big part of design is admitting that you don't know anything, checking your own assumptions, and realizing that you're probably wrong and not the core user, or like you have to think beyond your own self. Like what you said, like you're typically not like designing in a silo. So it's actually very service oriented. So I think that's like an interesting take, where maybe if you've had some like customer service roles in the past, had to balance needs of like different people, that's a very good skill set that applies to design.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. It is kind of being able to walk that line between giving the client what they want, as well as kind of maybe helping them to see that some of these other things are also very important. Like, I've done this a lot of times. Obviously, you're probably going to need blah, blah, blah. And they're like, no, we don't need that. And you're like, maybe you do. So yeah, I love the idea. I mean, also, I have a very strong and long history of being in, food service, customer service, all these kinds of like very, very forward facing roles, where you're right. It is very helpful to have those communication skills and have the people skills necessary to like work with people that say they want your help, but maybe aren't making it very easy on you or them to get that help. Okay, so we do have a lot of questions, or sorry, a lot of people are sharing in the thread. Munir had shared this like case study structure portfolio link. So please feel free to check that out if you want. It's up further in the thread. Caitlin has also asked, do you have any books, podcasts, or YouTubers that you recommend for people making this transition?
My favorite design book to recommend is Don't Make Me Think. It's like a very basic design book, but also very fun to read, and is not like very like hard design. It's like more of a thought process on how to take a design approach. So I really like that. There's like a follow-up book too that I don't remember the name of, but it's something like Don't Make Me Think too. I don't know.
Awesome.
I'm not a huge podcast person, but I used to listen to Design Details. That was one of my favorites, where they interview designers about specific things or just their life. And I thought it was interesting to hear their perspective. And one YouTuber I really like is, I don't know how to pronounce her name. I think it's Femka. But she has a really awesome YouTube channel about her life as a designer, getting into design, portfolio tips. Yeah, Femke is how you spell it. Don't know how to say it, but she is wonderful. And I follow her on Twitter, I think, but I also sometimes watch her YouTube videos because they're really engaging and fun. Yeah, great resource.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those. I do just want to flag for anybody, if maybe you haven't been following the Zoom chat, we have about 20 minutes left, maybe a little bit less, in today's session. So if you have questions that you want to ask, we want to make sure that you get answers. So definitely make sure you either come off mute and ask them. You can raise them into the Zoom chat, or you can DM me. So please feel free to do that if you'd like. We did get this other question I thought was kind of interesting. This person says, I'm halfway through a computer science degree, but I need to know if it's unrealistic to apply for jobs when I'm not that close to graduating. What's your opinion on this?
I think it's hard to say because I don't know how much longer you'll be in school or if you're doing courses full-time or part-time. I think most companies that have job listings aren't really looking to fill them 2 years in the future if you're halfway through a 4-year full-time program, I'm assuming. So like, I don't think it's too early to start building connections towards that if you know where you want to go. And like making connections with maybe some people that work there, asking them what it's like, what you can do to kind of work towards that. Because those jobs will probably be there in a couple years. Maybe like someone has left, maybe they're growing their team out more. So maybe not applying to a specific job, but kind of forming that connection. And I also think as a student, it's a good opportunity to apply for some internship programs. Those are designed specifically for students that aren't ready to fully join the workforce and still have some credits to wrap up, but provide really great work experience. A lot of times, like exactly the type of work that like a full-time product designer would do. So it's like a good time to maybe start thinking about that. A lot of the bigger companies have specific internship programs where the interns end up being very involved in projects and have really exciting and fun projects to work on. So just start working towards there, even if you're not directly applying for like jobs that are listed right now.
Yeah, that's great. We also have somebody in the chat saying some companies have roles for college grads that they fill in the fall of your last year. That are designed that you would start the fall after you graduate. So I think that's important to note. I also want to flag if you are, a new graduate or a pivoter or, anything like that, make sure you sign up for our September mini summit because that's the focus of the whole thing. I'll grab a link for you, but it's all about, people that are returning to work after a break. If you are a new grad or a recent grad, or if you are, trying to pivot your career either, into a new field, into a new job within the same industry, whatever. So I'll grab the link for that for y'all because it's a free event. Our summits are always my favorite part of the month. And it's really helpful to a lot of people. So while I'm grabbing that link, one of the other questions that we wanted to address, this person said, problem solving is my superpower, but how can I demonstrate that to employers? And I really like some of the examples you gave earlier of like ways that you could kind of discuss these transferable skills, but how can you discuss them when it's something that's kind of nebulous? It's not really easy to like concretely pin down or show metrics on like how you're able to solve problems 20% faster than everybody else or whatever.
Yeah, agreed. I don't mean to be repetitive, but again, I think your portfolio is probably your best bet. So kind of what I talked about before about presenting a case study, your thought process in how you solve that problem will demonstrate your problem solving skills very well. And the more detail that you go in to kind of share your expertise in problem solving, I think will help your case a lot. And maybe highlight what you would have done differently if you had the opportunity to try again. That's a great point that often gets missed. In design interviews, sometimes there are design exercises during that process. So sometimes it's like a whiteboarding exercise where you're given a prompt and then you have to like talk through how you would solve it and design something live in a whiteboard, which may be scary. Sometimes they allow you to do a take-home exercise. So they'll give you a prompt and give you maybe a couple days to work through it in your own time. So if you say don't have a super strong resume with a lot of work experience, but you at least got into the interview process and you really want to demonstrate that problem solving ability, these exercises and challenges would actually help you showcase that very well.
Cool. We do have another question in that same vein. Celeste is asking, how can you verbalize your prioritization method? I always get stuck on this one in interviews.
Can you explain more by what you mean by prioritization method?
Yeah,
like
so
how you trade-off?
Oh, there's Celeste. Hey,
Yeah.
go right ahead.
I've been asked, like, if you're working on a big project or you have multiple competing tasks or something like that, like, how do you go about prioritizing? And I always get stuck. Like, I know that there's a way that I do it, but I don't know that I've ever had to verbalize like what I do. So I just, any tips, or I don't know, what are people looking for when they ask for that, when they ask that question, I guess?
I think one thing you could do is bring it back to your design process. So the steps that you, like the high level steps that you take to get from the initial problem to the final solution, like there are usually like specific touch points that you go through in the design process, and tying your decision making back to that. You could also talk about like getting inputs to make decisions on trade-offs. So if you were trying to decide between two things, like what influenced your decision in the end? Like, did you talk to more people and they liked one solution more than the other? Did you just like test it out and like see what happens? I think what they're trying to get at is kind of your decision-making process. And if you're just making like gut decisions, like I picked this one just because I liked it, which is probably a very bad answer, versus like these are the specific reasons why I chose this. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be the right answer or the right choice. There often isn't a right choice. It's just the inputs that you take in order to inform that decision. Does that help?
Yeah.
It sounds like the idea of like, do you ask questions? Are you looking for specific data points? You know, do you ask for a deadline on something? Are you, you know, if you get this instruction from the top down, are you, you know, asking like, hey, or like, you know, presenting like, here's what I currently have on my plate. Where would you like me to, you know, how would you like me to put this into my current priorities list? That obviously it's less product design specific, but that's something that I hear a lot on these calls.
Yeah,
so
that comes up a
hopefully that
lot.
helps. Did you have anything you wanted to ask as a follow-up, Celeste?
No, thank you. That was awesome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. We have one more from Munir. They ask, in your opinion, what do you think the best way is to target big companies that sponsor H-1B visas, especially if you're going to have to try and convince them that you're the best fit for the job and that they should be willing to invest in you? Do you have any experience in this?
I do have some experience, but it didn't work out that well. I also needed an H-1B visa and I was not able to get one. So I don't know if I can help you exactly, but I think it's probably easier to get H-1B sponsorship if you are being considered for a very like highly skilled position where it's difficult to hire a different person with your exact skill set. So building up experience and expertise in a specific area and really showcasing that you're the best person for the job and just another person wouldn't really do the trick, that might help. I would say it is more challenging for an entry level position or like transitioning from an unrelated role if that's what you're looking to do. Like typically I see it more with people that have a lot of experience and very specific experience that is for a role that's difficult to hire for.
Yeah, and I think that's something I see a lot in like our virtual job fairs where a lot of like you get kind of that similar answer from a lot of companies, but there's also plenty that say, you know, just ask. Because the worst they can say is no, but at least then you know what the position is, or you can find out, what roles do you tend to go after visas for. Like, so yeah, I think that's a really good point. You are more likely to get it in certain positions or with certain skills. But if you ask, then at least you'll know if you have those skills, or you can maybe find out more about what those skills might be. So yeah, I like that. Thank you for asking that question.
Also maybe build towards it with contracts that aren't as like you don't need an H-1B to do a contract assignment. So maybe they would be a little more lenient and you could get the experience that you want and need in order to work towards that future H-1B job.
Ooh, that's a good point. Thank you for that. Okay, so we've got 10 minutes left. I want to make sure we save some time at the end to talk a little bit more about Lattice and the company culture. This person had wanted to know, I'm studying web development like HTML, CSS, JS, and front end, but I'm unsure if those skills transfer to product design. If not, what hard skills should I be seeking out?
Yeah, I think those skills are definitely transferable, but maybe on a more supplemental basis to the core product design skill set. I know a lot of designers that don't know any web development at all, but are still very incredible at their job. So it's not a hard requirement, but is a really nice to have skill. So in addition to web development skills, I would think about learning maybe some fundamental design principles, user research methodologies, and of course, like learn how to use some common design tools like Figma or Sketch, because usually the output that designers make is like a mock-up. So you'll have to know how to make the mock-up if you want to become a product designer. But one nice thing about having web development skills is you'll be able to build the mock-ups that you design. So that is like a huge plus in the job market and in efficiency, because like you'll know exactly what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah, you're not having to try and communicate this to another person to get them to produce what you need. Yeah, I like that. Okay, a question that we got asked a lot. A lot of people wanted to know if you have any job boards or networking techniques that you recommend, or organizations that they can connect with to learn more about the industry as well as upcoming opportunities. Now, obviously, I strongly recommend Powerfly because tech and remote jobs are our focus. But are there any resources or groups or anything like this that you recommend or that you've seen?
Yeah, Power to Fly, of course, wonderful. I'm a little biased because I used to work at Twitter, but I actually think Twitter is really great for networking opportunities, especially within the design field, because so many designers are on Twitter talking about design all day, it seems. So you can meet other designers, follow what they're up to, hear about what they're thinking about directly. Like they tweet a lot of design opinions, so you can agree or disagree with them. You can also follow companies, or a lot of design teams have their own Twitter accounts. At Lattice, we have like our individual Twitter accounts, but also a Lattice design account, and we'll tweet job opportunities and design cool stuff that's happening, stuff we do as a team. I hear a lot about people reaching out to designers and just like getting some time to chat with them or asking for advice. Most of the designers I know are pretty open to mentoring folks that are new to the industry. So like I think the design industry is fairly kind. And so like it doesn't hurt to ask or try to make that connection. One thing that I remember off the top of my head is there's like a mentorship pairing program or group called, I think it's called ADP List, and it'll help connect you to design mentors. And these are people that have specifically said like, yes, I'm open to mentoring people. So that's a great place to meet people and maybe get their eyes on your portfolio and see if there's anything that you should change. Maybe they can look at your resume. They can give you some advice on interviewing, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I see Munir coming in hot with the links. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, amazing links.
Yeah, right? This is so helpful.
Thank you.
So yeah, Celeste is also chiming in that Discord and Clubhouse are also good for networking. So yeah, awesome. Love to see people sharing, sharing the wealth of knowledge that they have.
Yeah.
All right, the last question we're going to touch on here is, do you have any tips for keeping up with the latest trends in product design? And I think this is especially, kind of important if you are transitioning without like the kind of traditional education background, if you're more late in your career or midway through your career, especially if you're transitioning from a completely different field, some place that you don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of, what's going on in the product design world.
Yeah. Honestly, what I personally just enjoy doing is poking around when a new product launches or new features. Like on Product Hunt, they're always announcing new products that are coming out, so you can just try them out and like see what is out there and being launched. Whenever I hear about a new thing, I really like just trying it out and getting inspiration for my own work. Like, oh, I really like the color scheme they used here. Oh, I really like this typography. I really like this style of button, and like inform that in my own design. And it's also helpful to kind of dissect why they did what they did and why things work the way that they do, and kind of like work backwards. So imagine like why the team might have like made this trade-off or didn't build this one thing, what you would do if you were like a designer on this product, like how you would improve it. That's like a really great way to test your own skills and also like think about like a real life scenario and like why, like what could have gone into that design process.
Great, thank you for touching on that, because you're right. There's a lot of kind of those things that you can explore on your own without really having to be in that field or really immersed in that world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what you're seeing in front of you right now is a list of questions that we had asked Amy prior to today's session about the company culture at Lattice. So let's work through these in the like 4 minutes we have left. You talked about the company culture as being growth minded. Is that something that's hugely important, like on like a list of these are kind of like our group our God, I'm so sorry guys, I cannot English today. If these are some of like your core priorities within the org, or is that something you think that just sort of happens organically because of the type of people that work at Lattice?
I think it's both. It's a core value that we strive for at Lattice, and because of that value, we tend to hire people that also reflect that. So like we're very intentional about our hiring and our processes and how we do things. And we're always open to experimentation and trying new things, which works well for me because that's like very part of my process as a designer, as you've learned over the last hour. So it's great to have a company that also reflects similar values, is open to trying new things, and everyone is kind of just open-minded and wanting to like be empathetic, learn more about others, and better themselves, if that makes sense.
No, I absolutely love that. We binge watched, my husband and I binge watched Ted Lasso within the last like 2 weeks because the new season premiered last Friday. And one of the things that I love from that first season is he talks about like being curious, because if you're not curious, then you think you know everything, or at least you're giving that impression. And at least if you are curious and asking questions, you're going to learn new things. You're going to learn things about the people around you or about, the projects you're doing. And so I love that idea of being a growth-minded company and a growth-minded organization, because it's so important, because if you're not growing, other people are, other teams are. So yeah, I love that. Okay, so you talk about how the people are your favorite part of working at Lattice, and that is like it's a very common like answers to the question we get, right? Because it's so true. You're spending so much time with these other people. That it can make your day a lot easier or a lot harder depending on what that team looks like. In the time we have left though, let's talk about your top tips for someone who's interviewing. So I love your take on this about like reflecting like after the interview. So can you talk us through this?
Yeah, like take time to reflect on the interview and past interviews that you've had. Like what do you think went well about that interview? What do you think you could have done better? And try to take it as a learning experience, even if you end up not getting that job offer. But also I think it's important to talk about it in an interview. Like if someone's asking you about a past experience, like you don't always have to share the rosy picture. Like there are challenges that come with every job and role. And so sometimes touching on that and admitting that something was difficult and you had a hard time, but you overcame it somehow and learned from it, that's really important in an interview too.
Oh, I absolutely love that. There's a bunch of people talking in the chat about, questions about if Lattice offers internship opportunities or junior position openings, that kind of thing. So the slide that you're looking at right here, that has a list of just a selection of some of the open jobs at Lattice. I'm going to share the link here again in the chat thread to where you can go check out their page on Power to Fly. You can also apply via Lattice's own careers website as well, if you would like to. So no problems there, just letting you know different places you can go to kind of see what Lattice has on offer. I want to say a huge thank you to you, Amy. It's always, I love my job. I love getting to spend time with people and learning more about their jobs or their career field or their interests. And I know that it's not just the hour you spend with us. There's always prep time on the back end. So I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon.
Thank you. You were such a great facilitator and moderator. It's great talking to you.
Thank you. And then a huge thank you to you, our attendees. These were great questions. I'm so appreciative of everybody that was like sharing links in the chat. Munir, heart goes out to you. Thank you. Celeste had great questions as well. There were many other people that asked awesome questions too. So thank you for that, y'all. It makes these events so much more interactive and so much more personal. So thank you for that. I hope that you guys all found today useful. If you, hopefully you'll be joining us either for our September summit or any of our amazing events that are upcoming in the next week. So hopefully you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and I look forward to seeing all of you coming back and joining us for future events. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you then. Bye.
Thank you all.